All right, so I'd like to first of all thank Antony, who agreed. He says it wasn't last minute. In my book, it was, but being willing to help us chair this, what we feel is a very important panel. So just to give you some background, Antony is currently a technical advisor for National Treasury, specifically helping them looking at budget reform and fiscal policy. Prior to going independent, Antony has worked for the CDE. He's consulted to the CDE, Center for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation, Institute for Security Studies. So thank you so much. Sydney Mayisela also coming in a little last minute, but we're also super appreciative of being willing to do that. So he is, to some degree, our de facto National Treasury representative, although I don't think that would be officially. He is the city advisor to the National Treasury City Support Program. So we're very, very grateful to have someone really in the thick of policy and implementation sitting with us. Shirley Robinson, welcome. She's the head of public economics and climate change practice at DNA Economics. And she was previously Chief Director of Public Policy Services at the Western Cape Treasury, where she also spent a lot of her time within the kind of thick of municipal finance and municipal service delivery. Ibrahim Khalil Hassan, welcome, thank you so much. Senior researcher at the GCRO, or the Gauteng City Region Observatory, where he helps build the knowledge base that government, business, labor, civil society, and residents all need to make the Gauteng region competitive, spatially integrated, environmentally sustainable, and socially inclusive. We'll also hear from a cool presentation that he's going to give us later today as well. So we'll be seeing a lot of him today. So, Antony, thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to allow everyone just to introduce themselves quickly, tell us a little bit about where we come from, and I'm going to ask just to focus on a little bit of professional background, but also where we live and why, because I think that that's potentially interesting, but maybe not. So I'm Antony Altbeker, as you know, well, as you've been told, I work a lot at National Treasury. I've worked on and off at National Treasury for nearly 30 years. So therefore I'm a neoconservative, market-oriented person who everyone hates. I grew up in Joburg. I lived in Joburg for 45 years. But I've been living in Cape Town for the last 10. And just to say that, why did we move? We moved for the amenity values of Cape Town. And I think that's worth just being honest about, right? We moved because we've got kids and we thought the kids were going to be teenagers, and where did we prefer them to be teenagers? Well, we thought it would be better in Cape Town. And so that's an important thing to know about how households work, I think, and it matters for cities. I will say this about Cape Town. Suburban Cape Town and the Cape Town CBD work better than suburban Joburg and the Joburg CBD. I don't know about the rest. I think it's a much more arguable question about the township conditions and the nature of the quality of life and the amenity values and the economic functionality and the level of investment. I think those are more open questions. But that's my sense of the cities that I'm most familiar with. So that's where I am, that's who I am, that's where I come from. I'm going to ask Sydney and then Shirley and then Ibrahim to give us a little bit of their sense as well.
Okay, thank you. My name is Sydney. My name is Sydney Mayisela. I'm attached to National Treasury City Support Program. I think I've been with the program for the past 4 years, mainly responsible for city advisory, leading the team in terms of how we interact with the cities, in particular as we implement a number of reforms within the city space. But before I joined Treasury, I've been in consulting space for more than 14 years or so, or 15 years, yeah, where I've been doing a lot of regional economic development work across a number of municipalities and across the country. And also doing some policy work, for example, on the alignment of an NSDP, PGDS, and the IDPs, which was one of the most interesting work which was commissioned by the presidency some years ago in trying to align the planning within the government. But in recent years with Treasury, one of the most interesting work, it's the work on what we call now the Metro Trading Services, but we'll talk about it a little bit later. And I grew up in the rural heartlands of Limpopo, where literally in the rural, but moved to Pretoria, I think, in the early 2000s. And I was en route to Joburg, but I got stuck in Pretoria. So, and I started to like Pretoria because of, I think it's quite different from Joburg. It's not congested. There's a much more better quality of life in Pretoria. And also my experience of Pretoria, I mean, in the early 2000s, I think I will say up until 2016, it was technically working a little bit better. But I think things deteriorated, but they deteriorated even, if you look at the evidence, you will say before 2016, because of a number of reasons. And like my colleague, yeah, the life in the townships, I frequent the townships a lot. So the townships have deteriorated quite rapidly, but it's not either a Pretoria thing or it's, I mean, if you, our colleagues that are in Cape Town as well, they talk about that, and that's one of the major problems that have been there. Unfortunately, in some cities, it's not only the townships, it's the whole city. So, which is a bit of a challenge when you have the entire city collapsing. At least if there's some sections, then you can be able to target a particular section, so with a particular program, which will assist them. Yeah, maybe let me stop here.
Morning, everyone. In the back here. Okay. I'm rather short, so my voice carries. I've learned to have presence. I'm Shirley Robinson. Like Antony, I have bounced backwards and forwards in the public sector from early days in National Treasury's budget team and the heady days of the early 2000s. And I've moved around quite a bit. I think that I'm about to start packing my boxes again. I am about to move for about my 35th time in my life. I currently live in Cape Town. So I'm an interesting professional. At heart, I'm a public servant. And I keep on telling everyone I'm an accidental consultant. I have taken over from Faucher's very big shoes. Do you see how big those shoes are? As the practice head of public economics and climate policy and finance in DNA. But I have a treasury heart, although on the left, I think. So I was in the budget team in Trevor Manuel's budget team from '99 as a young professional, and those were amazing days. Do you know, we were all under 30 in those days, and we were driving reform. Do you remember those days, Antony? We worked our butt offs, but we were part of making a difference. And that treasury at that stage was diverse. There were people from everywhere. And that was my 4 years of living in Pretoria. But for family reasons, I came back down to Cape Town and I worked in the Western Cape Treasury for a couple of years. and then I exited and ran my own consulting company. And that, I think that was when a number of you met me. I was National Treasury GTAC support to the City Support Program Phase 1. And so in those days, it was heady days. I took a stand to live in Cape Town. I'm a Cape Townian. I spoke at your epic pool. I've tried to leave Cape Town 3 times in my life. And God, that mountain and drumbeat draw me back every time. So a time in Pretoria was good work-wise, but Cape Town's my family, my home, my connections. I was part of driving the spatial tax data. So thanks very much to the GCRO. If anyone wants to know the 7 years of long, torturous journey that got to get to the presentations that you saw yesterday. We were driving that from the first stage of the city support with, and was very much about relationships and understanding the data custodians. I also drove the subnational doing business and ran around the metros for about 7 years before the World Bank decided that their methodology needed a little bit of revision. And I headed off, I turned 50 and decided my midlife crisis was that myself and my daughter, dog and cat, would take a trip to Europe and go and work in Europe, my lifelong dream. Got a job, and then COVID hit. Well, Europe thought it was a one-day wonder, you know, so we took the flight, sold up everything, didn't sell my house in Oranjezicht. And spent 2 years in Rotterdam. Loved being able, after the first year, to travel, but that COVID time was hard. And you know, that Dutch European climate is cold. And we missed Africa. So when you look at African cities, doesn't matter where you are, Cape Town's a little bit more sanitized, but we actually missed organized chaos. And so Netherlands was a bit too organized for us. When we went across to Spain, and I don't know if anyone's seen the floods in Valencia, we spent some time in Valencia, and it was lovely. It was more chaotic. It made us feel more at home. There was more diversity, more energy, more dynamism. And so I came back to the Western Cape and had a couple of years there, particularly working on municipalities. And my love is looking at the next step in blended financing. How do we finance this infrastructure boost? I live in Cape Town at the moment. I'm close to my daughter's school. 2 weeks till she finishes. And we are moving back to our house in Oranjezicht. I've climbed the property ladder. Who was the colleague that I was talking to? I climbed the property ladder over 25 years in Cape Town with my first apartment, my first flat on the urban edge in 1998. And I've climbed the property ladder, and I bought a house in Oranjezicht in 2012. Forward on 12 years later, that property, just to give you an idea, it has appreciated 3 times the amount that I bought it at. I could never, ever, ever hope to buy into that area. And that just shows you the property market. It is a particular good area to buy property in, but that just shows you the property aspects. And so the work that Cape Town's doing on Airbnb, etc., understanding the property market, we need to really understand this for inclusive cities. But I agree, Antony. I love living in Cape Town because of the connectivity, because it works. When a water main bursts, you call the city, they're there. They care about their water losses. I've chosen to live there and to come back, and hopefully I'll stay more than a couple of years. But engaging in the municipal blended financing and understanding places and what makes them work is very close to my heart. Handing over to you, Gil.
Hi, good morning, and thanks for the invitation. My name's Ibrahim. I work at the GCRO. I've recently returned to full-time employment. Like other people here, I was a consultant for a very long time. One of the more interesting things I did while being a consultant was that I learned to code, and I sold a couple of apps, which was really fascinating, and that was the reason why I decided to come back into full-time employment. Because I realized what you could do with technology and how one could match that, specifically in terms of procurement reform. So that was the kind of the motivation to get back into this here, to do some data science and see if we can develop a kind of a prototype. And we almost there. I'm hoping that by the end of the year we're able to actually, we've demonstrated some of it already, but to demonstrate it in a more public way. So I stay in Johannesburg. I've grown up in Johannesburg. I first stayed in Lenasia, I then stayed in Melville for a very long time, and now I stay in Montgomery Park. Pretty much like Anthony, you know, kids, school, being close to work. I was, however, born in Benoni, which is where my granny stays, and that's very important for you guys to know, because for sure save the best presentation for 4 o'clock on a Friday. And I'm gonna tell you guys a little bit more story about that, about my granny's place in Actonville. In terms of my own work, I was on the other side. So all of these guys from the National Treasury, I spent a lot of time in the trade union movements in my younger days. One of the things I did was I worked at Naledi. Very proud that we developed something called the People's Budget Campaign. It was an evidence-based response to what we argued at the time was a neoliberal perspective coming out from the National Treasury. And we had great, I mean, we had respectful and very evidence-based discussions, but I mean, I come from a different tradition. Before that, I actually started, funnily, working in government and working on urban regeneration programs, which was a great introduction to Gauteng. I literally went all over the province, and I was like 24 years old. It was brilliant. You got to move around and understand the city. Do things work in Johannesburg, which is the other thing that people have spoken about. Some of it works, some of it doesn't work. But we definitely have a crisis within Johannesburg in terms of infrastructure, in terms of responding to maintenance. Yeah, and I mean, I'm very sad that that it's gone this way. We have not only the maintenance crisis, but we also have, I think, broader logistical crisis that we need to be dealing with to actually ensure that goods move effectively within the city. What else do I need to tell you? One last thing: the best presentation is at 4 o'clock today, so please come.
So I'm going to leave it. I'm not going to respond to the provocation that you were on the other side to National Treasury. I don't know what that means. We're on everybody's side. Sure. We speak with the word of God. We speak with the voice of God. Okay, so we were given a very broad heading for this panel discussion. Priorities for the cities. If the cities are the future, what should we do to make our cities work better and use them to be the vehicle through which South Africa achieves some level of prosperity and inclusiveness and a better life for all, and all the things that we are committed to. And when you have this topic of what are the priorities, I mean, you can literally go anywhere with it. You can talk very micro, you can talk very macro, you can talk about crime, you can talk about infrastructure, you can talk about labor markets, you can talk about housing markets, you can talk about migration. There's any number of ways in which you can think about this issue of what are the priorities. So I'm a kind of first principles kind of guy, and so I'm going to give you my first principles take on how I think about what the priorities are for the city, and then I'm going to let everybody A, react to that, and B, offer a different sense of what the priorities might be. I'm going to try to be quite brief, and I'm going to ask everyone else to try to be quite brief, but these things take a bit of time, so it's not like, I don't think it's helpful to sit here and give you a list of the 10 things we would do differently or do that aren't being done. So when I talk about first principles, I think there's two kinds of first principles that, we're trained, when you think about a city as an economist, there are two sets of ideas as first principles. The one is the production function and how we think production functions work, and the other is the economics of agglomeration. And I'm going to try and talk about both of those, hopefully sensibly. So the production function, I mean, you know, I'm not going to bore you, you all know. It's about the quantity of the factors of production that you've got and how they are combined and how technology allows the combination of the factors of production to produce a level of output. The production function typically has diminishing marginal returns as an assumption, and the assumption is also that technology progresses, so that the same quantity of your same endowment in one period should produce more in a later period because the technology that you use to combine those factors produces more output. And the reason we think technology always progresses is because we don't forget. We never forget how to do something, so we can never get worse at combining the factors. We can only get better at combining them, so technology progresses. The cities are, in a sense, machines for bringing the factors of production together. They are, in a sense, a technology. Their scale, basically a city is an absence of space between the factors of production. You've got a lot of factors of production, a lot of people in one place, you've hopefully got a lot of capital in one place, and the absence of space means that the division of labor you can have a much more developed division of labor, much more specialization, therefore much more productivity. And because everybody's living close together, ideas can transmit rapidly from one to another, ideas can generate faster, and so you get this phenomenon of a rapid development of technology, a rapid diffusion of technology. And in a sense, the economics of agglomeration is an economics of increasing returns, which changes the production function a little bit, but because you've got this possibility of everybody being in the same place, the network effects of that can be very productive, and cities can help make human progress much more rapid than it would otherwise have been. So I don't think that general model maps terribly well to the South African reality today. I think obviously our cities do things that are better than not having cities, but I think that there are parts of that model that aren't true about where we are and where we're going. So the one part that's not true is that we don't use space efficiently. I mean, everybody knows this. We have big spatial problems in our cities. The legacy of apartheid, plus the way we have implemented some of our development strategies, has not actually led to the intensification of the use of space. We have not increased density, and that leads to all kinds of problems. So I think somebody mentioned the Hausman papers yesterday. I mean, one of the big points that they make is the relationship between transport costs and the reservation wage, and how that is a factor in understanding our labor market, and it's related to the spatial structure of our cities. So that's the one thing that makes our cities a bit different. We're not terribly efficient as cities. The second is that certainly for some cities, and in particular the Gauteng cities, and maybe some of the others as well, we are not seeing an expansion of public infrastructure. If anything, we're seeing a decline in public infrastructure, and that means that instead of growing the factors of production are actually shrinking, and that has profound effects in your production function, because the quantity of the endowments is smaller than it should be. And I think that that's like a real issue in our cities that we have to grapple with. Like, why is that happening? There's a third thing that I think is really important in terms of thinking about our cities. That as a professional, my first I don't know, long time. The work I did related mostly to crime and justice, and I feel like maybe I'm getting old and I'm reverting to type, but I do think that there's something going on here that's important, and it's not like an ordinary kind of. I don't want to talk about crime, but I think one of the ways in which it's really useful to think about policing is to think about the realities of what a city is. A city is a collection of literally millions of people who don't know each other and who have to interact in the production function. When you have millions of people, you also have millions of conflicting interests and conflicting passions and differences on the way people think about the world, and differences in their in where their interests take them. And the best explanation for the reason why policing is necessary is because when you have millions of people who don't know each other and who have to interact, you're always going to have what one of the theorists of policing called events in which somebody needs to do something but nobody's doing it yet. And that's when you call the police, because somebody has to have the authority to step into a situation and tell people what to do on pain of being arrested. Now, some of that is crime, and some of that is just disputes, and some of it is a car accident. There's accidents and anything can happen that brings people into a conflictual relationship. And where the resolution requires some intervention from an external source. I think something is happening in our cities that is reducing the efficiency of the cities in a different way from the absence of infrastructure and the spatial problem. And that is, I think, our governance of ourselves is not improving, and is in some areas weakening. If you think about it, as economists think about these things, we think about games and repeated prisoners' dilemmas. And repeated prisoners' dilemmas can lead to cooperative outcomes if they are repeated infinitely and there's no endpoint. And if there is somebody who takes on the burden of punishing defectors in the prisoner's dilemma, because punishment is costly. Somebody has to do it. And I think we have a situation where cities are supposed to be positive-sum games, but human beings often see the world in zero-sum terms. And when zero-sum activity and when people act as if the world is a zero-sum, consists of zero-sum games, you can get negative-sum outcomes. And our world gets less productive because the capacity to work together is weakening or is diminished. And I think that there's something going on in our cities where we are not governing ourselves adequately. And that's about politics, but it's not just about politics. It's about something in the atmosphere in our cities. Institutions unfortunately in economics, institutions can mean anything that isn't obvious, right? But institutions for an economist is like any norm, any rule that prevents people from doing something that they otherwise might have done. That's basically what it comes down to. And our institutions are weak, but I think that the exploitation of those gaps has become the fact that. So what stops people from behaving in a zero-sum or negative-sum way? It's either social norms or it's strong governance. And I think that our cities are struggling with both of those. And I think, like I said, I'm reverting to my old I think that there's something going on in our cities that we need to think hard about maybe, I don't want to talk about these things as, like a Trumpist, like make America great again. I'm not sure that we had it in the past, but whatever it is that we need it. And it's not a kind of historical revisionism that, things were so great that we could get on with each other in the past. But I think we need to find a way of making our cities work better through collective action. And I think that for me, that's the priority. The priority is we have to address the human relations stuff that we're struggling with in our cities. So, at the risk of, well, maybe I've provoked people and they'll hate and they'll respond, but maybe your priorities match my priorities.
So institutions matters, right? So one of the biggest problems that we have currently in our cities, and generally in government in the last few years, I describe it as we have people that should be advising our political principles being advised by the political principle. So you have people that should be advising others being advised by the people that they should be advising. That creates a whole lot of problems. And that's the crux of our problems. And across all the cities, across all our 8 cities, for example, that's the biggest problem. Where in some instances where the officials know that their responsibilities to advise, you find that they are fighting for that. They are not given the space to advise. But also, one of the major problems our cities are facing is because now the government the people that should be advised are advising. Then they tend to seek advice in the wrong places. I'll give you an example with a simple thing. The sustainability of cities is dependent on their ability to generate the income. So if they are not able to generate the income, they are likely to collapse. So it just happened one day that the cities wake up in the morning and the national government announced that up to 100 megawatts can be, anyone can produce like that. And the major source of cities' income, what is it? It's electricity. So if you take all the good customers out of the grid, what does it mean for the cities? All our cities have a problem, a big problem of income, which no one is talking about it, which gets eroded as a result. So once you then have a government which then those who are should be advising are being advised by the others, and